The headset slides over your eyes, and suddenly you're standing on the edge of a cliff that doesn't exist. Your heart pounds as virtual wind whips through your hair. Your palms sweat as you peer into an abyss rendered in perfect detail. Every neural pathway screams danger. Every instinct demands retreat. Yet somewhere in the rational corners of your mind, you know you're standing safely in your living room. This moment of cognitive dissonance, this fracture between what feels real and what you know to be artificial, might be the most honest experience you've had all day. Because what if I told you that right now, as you absorb these words, there's a significant chance that none of this is real? Not the screen before you, not the chair beneath you, not even the thoughts forming in what you believe to be your mind. What if everything you've ever experienced, every memory you cherish, every sensation that convinces you of your existence is nothing more than electrical impulses in some vast computational system? This isn't the paranoid rambling of conspiracy theorists or the fevered imagination of science fiction writers. This is a serious philosophical and scientific inquiry that has captured the attention of brilliant minds from Silicon Valley to the halls of Oxford University. The simulation hypothesis, as it has come to be known, suggests that our reality might be nothing more than an incredibly sophisticated computer program. And we, the inhabitants of this reality, might be nothing more than information patterns running on some cosmic server. The modern world offers us countless glimpses into this possibility. We've created virtual worlds so immersive that players lose themselves for hours, days, even years within their digital confines. We've built artificial intelligences that can paint masterpieces, compose symphonies, and hold conversations indistinguishable from human discourse. We've developed neural interfaces that can read thoughts and stimulate experiences directly in the brain. Each technological leap brings us closer to a future where the line between real and artificial becomes not just blurred, but potentially meaningless. Consider the progression of our virtual worlds. 40 years ago, Pong offered us two white rectangles batting a square dot back and forth on a black screen. Today, we have photorealistic environments populated by characters whose facial expressions convey subtle emotions, whose voices carry the weight of complex personalities, whose behaviors emerge from intricate systems of motivation and desire. The leap from pixels to near reality has happened within a single human lifetime. If this exponential growth continues, how long before our simulations become indistinguishable from the world we inhabit? But the truly unsettling question isn't about our technology's future capabilities. It's about where we might already be on this spectrum. If some advanced civilization has already achieved the ability to create conscious beings within simulated realities, then statistics alone suggest we're more likely to be among the simulated than among the simulators. It's a numbers game that favors illusion over authenticity, copies over originals. This realization carries profound implications for everything we hold dear. If our reality is simulated, what does that mean for our relationships, our achievements, our suffering? When you feel joy at a sunset or grief at a loss, when you struggle with difficult decisions or celebrate hard-won victories, are these experiences any less meaningful if they occur within a computational framework rather than a physical universe? The question cuts to the very heart of what we consider valuable about existence. Yet this anxiety about the nature of reality is far from new. 2,400 years ago, in a cave allegory that still echoes through philosophical discourse today, Plato asked his students to imagine prisoners chained in darkness, watching shadows dance on a wall, believing these flickering phantoms to be the entirety of reality. What would happen, he wondered, if one prisoner broke free and discovered that the shadows were merely projections of objects illuminated by firelight? And what if that freed prisoner ventured further still and found that even the fire was nothing compared to the blazing sun of true reality? Plato's cave serves as a perfect metaphor for our current predicament. We sit in our own technological cave, surrounded by screens that project images of reality, mistaking these representations for the authentic experience. The irony isn't lost that you might be reading these very words on yet another screen, another potential barrier between you and unmediated truth. Centuries after Plato, René Descartes pushed this skepticism even further with his thought experiment of the evil demon. What if, he asked, some malevolent being of supreme power was systematically deceiving us about every aspect of our experience? What if our senses, which we rely on to understand the world, were being manipulated to present us with a false reality? Descartes' demon was a philosophical device designed to strip away all assumptions and find some bedrock of certainty. His famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am," was meant to establish the one indubitable fact that even the most powerful deceiver couldn't fake: the existence of the thinking self. But modern neuroscience and computer science have complicated even this seemingly solid foundation. We now understand that consciousness, that most fundamental sense of self, emerges from patterns of neural activity that can, at least in principle, be replicated in silicon. If our thoughts are simply information processing, if our sense of self is merely a persistent pattern of data, then even Descartes' certainty becomes questionable. The evil demon of his imagination has been replaced by something far more plausible and far more terrifying: the possibility that we're not being deceived by some external force, but that we ourselves are the deception, programs that have convinced themselves they're real. This shift from philosophical thought experiment to potential reality has been driven largely by our own technological achievements. Every breakthrough in virtual reality, every advancement in artificial intelligence, every success in brain simulation brings us closer to capabilities that once seemed impossible. We've created video game characters that exhibit complex behaviors without anyone programming those specific actions. We've built neural networks that can generate human faces so realistic that they fool even careful observers, despite being entirely artificial. We've developed brain organoids, tiny clusters of neurons grown from human cells, that show signs of electrical activity resembling consciousness. Each of these achievements represents a step toward the ultimate question: could we create a reality so convincing that its inhabitants never suspect they're simulated? The answer seems increasingly to be yes. And if we can do it, then surely any civilization more advanced than ours could do it better. The logical extension of this reasoning leads to what philosophers call the simulation argument. If advanced civilizations run ancestor simulations or create virtual worlds populated by conscious beings, then the number of simulated beings would vastly outnumber the original, non-simulated ones. Nick Bostrom, the Oxford philosopher who first formalized this argument, presents it as a trilemma. Either advanced civilizations tend to go extinct before reaching simulation capabilities, or they lose interest in running ancestor simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. There's no fourth option that allows for both the existence of advanced civilizations and our certainty that we're living in base reality. The mathematics are stark and unsettling. If just one advanced civilization decides to run detailed historical simulations, they could create millions or billions of simulated beings, each convinced they're living in an authentic reality. From a purely statistical standpoint, you would be far more likely to be one of the simulated beings than one of the original ones. It's like a cosmic lottery where winning means being real, and the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against authenticity. This possibility transforms every aspect of human experience. The smartphone in your pocket, connecting you to a global network of information and relationships, might be nothing more than a convincing interface in a simulated world. The people you love might be sophisticated programs designed to provide realistic social interactions. Your memories of childhood, your plans for the future, your sense of personal growth and development might all be carefully crafted elements of your simulated existence. Yet even if this is true, even if we are living in a simulation, the implications aren't necessarily nihilistic. A simulated sunset can still move us to tears. A simulated embrace can still provide comfort. Simulated love can still transform lives. The question isn't whether our experiences are real in some metaphysical sense, but whether they have meaning and value within the context of our existence, whatever that existence might be. Perhaps the most profound realization isn't that we might be simulated, but that the question itself reveals something essential about the nature of consciousness and reality. Our ability to conceive of being simulated, to worry about the authenticity of our experiences, to seek truth beyond appearances, might be the most genuinely human trait of all. Whether we're biological beings contemplating the possibility of simulation or simulated beings achieving consciousness, the very act of questioning our reality demonstrates a remarkable capacity for self-reflection and philosophical inquiry. The simulation hypothesis forces us to confront fundamental questions about identity, consciousness, and meaning. It challenges our assumptions about the nature of existence and pushes us to examine what we truly value about being alive. In doing so, it might lead us not away from authentic experience, but toward a deeper appreciation of the mystery and wonder of consciousness itself. As we stand at this threshold between the analog and digital worlds, between certainty and doubt, we must grapple with the possibility that reality as we know it might be far stranger than we ever imagined. The screens that surround us, the virtual worlds we create and inhabit, the artificial minds we're bringing to life, all point toward a future where the boundary between real and simulated becomes not just permeable, but potentially irrelevant. The question isn't just whether we're living in a simulation. The question is what we do with that possibility. How do we live authentically in a world that might be artificial? How do we find meaning in experiences that might be programmed? How do we love, create, and strive in a reality that might be nothing more than an elaborate computation? These are the questions that define our digital age, the inquiries that will shape our understanding of consciousness, reality, and existence itself. Whether we're biological beings in a physical universe, or patterns of information in a vast computational system, we are the first generation to seriously consider the possibility that everything we know might be a simulation, and in that consideration, in that willingness to question the very foundations of reality, we reveal something profound about the nature of consciousness. and the relentless human drive to understand our place in whatever cosmos we inhabit. One of these three statements must be true, and each one changes everything we thought we knew about existence, consciousness, and our place in the universe. This is the foundation of what may be the most consequential philosophical argument of the 21st century, formulated by Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom in a paper that has fundamentally altered how we think about reality itself. The argument is deceptively simple in its structure, yet profound in its implications. Bostrom presents us with a trilemma, three possibilities that exhaust all logical options, leaving no room for comfortable alternatives. Either civilizations tend to go extinct before they develop the computational power to run realistic simulations of their ancestors, or they lose interest in running such simulations despite having the capability. Or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. There is no fourth option. There is no escape clause. One of these three propositions must be true, and the consequences of each possibility reshape our understanding of everything from the nature of consciousness to the meaning of human achievement. Let's examine the mathematics that make this argument so compelling and so unsettling. Consider a technologically mature civilization, one that has survived the various existential risks that threaten young species like ourselves. Such a civilization would possess computational resources that dwarf anything we can currently imagine. Conservative estimates suggest that the matter in a single planet could support computational systems capable of running billions of detailed simulations of entire civilizations, each populated by millions or billions of conscious beings. Now scale this up. A mature civilization might have access to the computational resources of entire star systems, or even galaxies. The numbers become astronomical in the most literal sense. A single advanced civilization could potentially run more simulated beings than have ever lived in the original, non-simulated universe. If just one such civilization decides to explore its history through detailed ancestor simulations, the simulated beings would outnumber the original ones by ratios that stretch comprehension. The statistical argument becomes unavoidable. If there are billions of simulated beings for every original one, then random selection would make it overwhelmingly likely that you are among the simulated rather than among the original. It's a lottery where authenticity is the prize, and the odds are stacked against reality with crushing mathematical certainty. But Bostrom's argument is more nuanced than simple number crunching. He carefully distinguishes between different types of simulations and different motivations for creating them. Ancestor simulations, detailed recreations of historical periods populated by conscious beings who believe they're living in the original timeline, represent just one category. There might also be simulations designed for entertainment, education, research, or purposes we can't even imagine from our current vantage point. The philosopher David Chalmers has expanded on Bostrom's framework, arguing that the simulation hypothesis deserves serious consideration not just as a philosophical thought experiment, but as a genuine possibility that could reshape fields from physics to psychology. Chalmers points out that if we're simulated, this doesn't necessarily make our existence less meaningful or our experiences less valid. A simulated pain still hurts. A simulated joy still brings happiness. A simulated discovery still expands knowledge within the context of that reality. Yet Chalmers also introduces troubling questions about the nature of simulated consciousness. Would the beings in our simulations necessarily be conscious? Or could they be philosophical zombies? Entities that behave as if conscious without any inner experience? And if consciousness can exist in simulation, what does this tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? These questions push us toward a deeper understanding of what it means to be aware, to experience, to exist as a thinking being. The counter-arguments from physicists reveal the profound challenges facing any simulation hypothesis. The computational requirements for simulating reality down to the quantum level appear to be impossibly vast. Every particle interaction, every quantum measurement, every probabilistic wave function collapse would need to be calculated in real time. The energy requirements alone might exceed the total energy available in the observable universe. But these objections assume that a simulation would need to model reality with perfect fidelity. Consider how our own video games achieve impressive realism through clever shortcuts and approximations. A simulated universe might employ similar techniques, rendering detailed environments only when conscious observers are present, maintaining lower-resolution models for unobserved phenomena, or using probabilistic algorithms to generate convincing but not perfectly accurate physical processes. The distinction between levels of simulation becomes crucial here. A simulation doesn't necessarily need to model every quantum interaction to convince its inhabitants of reality. Human senses have limited resolution. Human attention has finite scope. A sufficiently sophisticated simulation might only need to maintain detailed models within the narrow band of what conscious beings can actually perceive and measure. This leads to fascinating questions about the computational shortcuts that might exist in our own reality. Some physicists have noted curious features of the universe that might hint at underlying digital structure. The quantized nature of energy, the existence of a smallest possible length scale, the finite speed of light that limits information transfer. All could potentially be evidence of computational constraints in a simulated universe. But there's something Bostrom didn't fully consider in his original formulation, something that quantum mechanics brings into sharp focus. If consciousness itself plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality, as some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest, then the simulation hypothesis becomes far more complex and strange than initially imagined. The relationship between observer and observed, between consciousness and physical reality, might be so intertwined that simulation becomes indistinguishable from creation. The implications extend beyond abstract philosophy into practical questions about how we should live our lives. If there's a significant probability that we're simulated, should this knowledge change our behavior, our goals, our relationships? Some argue that it should make no difference. Whether simulated or not, we still experience love, beauty, suffering, and joy. We still face moral choices and their consequences. We still build connections with other conscious beings, regardless of the substrate on which that consciousness runs. Others suggest that the simulation hypothesis should inspire a kind of cosmic humility. If we're simulated, then there exist beings whose computational capabilities so exceed our own that they can create entire universes populated with conscious beings. This perspective might encourage us to focus on developing our own consciousness and capabilities, perhaps hoping to eventually join the ranks of the simulators rather than remaining among the simulated. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the simulation hypothesis isn't the possibility that we're not real, but the existential FOMO it creates. What if there's a real universe happening elsewhere, filled with experiences and possibilities that we, as simulated beings, can never access. What if there are forms of consciousness, types of existence, modes of being that are available only to original beings living in base reality? The simulated universe, no matter how detailed and convincing, might be just a pale shadow of the genuine article. This fear of missing out on authentic reality raises profound questions about the value we place on originality versus copy, on authentic versus reproduced experience. Is the Mona Lisa less beautiful if it's a perfect reproduction? Is a friendship less meaningful if your friend turns out to be an incredibly sophisticated artificial intelligence? The simulation hypothesis forces us to confront our deep-seated assumptions about what makes experiences valuable and meaningful. The thought experiment becomes even more complex when we consider the possibility of nested simulations. What if the beings we think are our simulators are themselves simulated by an even more advanced civilization? The hierarchy could extend indefinitely, with each level convinced they're closer to base reality than they actually are. In such a scenario, the question of who or what represents the ultimate reality becomes not just difficult to answer, but potentially meaningless. Nick Bostrom himself has noted that the simulation argument doesn't prove we're simulated, only that one of the three alternatives must be true. But this logical structure provides little comfort when we consider the implications of each possibility. If civilizations tend to go extinct before reaching simulation capabilities, then our own future looks grim. If they lose interest in running simulations, it suggests that the very activities and curiosities we consider most fundamentally human become irrelevant at higher levels of development. And if we are simulated, then everything we think we know about the nature of reality requires fundamental reconsideration. The probability calculations that support the simulation hypothesis can be approached from multiple angles, each yielding troubling conclusions. Even if we assume that only a tiny fraction of advanced civilizations run ancestor simulations, and that each simulation contains only a small fraction of the conscious beings that ever lived in the original timeline, the numbers still favor simulation over authenticity. The mathematics are relentless in their logic and devastating in their implications. Consider the temporal aspect of these simulations. If advanced civilizations run historical simulations covering different periods of their development, then beings living through what they experience as pivotal moments in their civilization's history would be disproportionately represented in the simulated population. We live during what appears to be a crucial period in human development, the transition from a single-planet species to a potentially galaxy-spanning civilization. This timing might actually increase the probability that our experiences are being simulated by our descendants or by alien civilizations interested in studying such transitional periods. The detection of simulation becomes a crucial question in this framework. Would we expect to find glitches, inconsistencies, or computational shortcuts that might reveal the artificial nature of our reality? Or would a sufficiently advanced simulation be designed to be undetectable from within? Some researchers have proposed experiments that might reveal pixelation at the smallest scales of space-time, or other signatures of digital reality, but these efforts remain highly speculative. There's also the question of purpose. If we are simulated, why? Are we part of an ancestor simulation designed to help our descendants understand their history? Are we entertainment for bored post-humans? Are we research subjects in some vast experiment exploring consciousness, society, or the development of intelligence? The purpose of our simulation, if it exists, might be beyond our current capacity to understand, just as the purpose of a scientific experiment might be incomprehensible to the laboratory mice. The simulation hypothesis also raises questions about free will and determinism. If our reality is computed, are our choices truly free, or are they simply the inevitable result of algorithmic processes? This question becomes even more complex when we consider that the beings running our simulation might themselves be simulated, creating chains of causation and responsibility that extend far beyond our understanding. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the simulation hypothesis is that it demonstrates the extraordinary power of human reasoning and imagination. Whether we're biological beings in a physical universe or information patterns in a computational system, we've managed to conceive of possibilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of existence itself. The very fact that we can formulate and seriously consider the simulation hypothesis might be one of the most impressive achievements of consciousness, regardless of the substrate on which that consciousness operates. If you knew with certainty that you were simulated, would you want to escape? Would you demand access to base reality? Or would you be content with the richness and meaning available within your simulated existence? These questions have no easy answers, but they force us to examine what we truly value about being alive, conscious, and capable of wonder. The philosopher's code that Bostrom has written into the structure of reality itself demands that we choose among three equally transformative possibilities. Each choice reshapes everything we thought we knew about existence, consciousness, and our place in whatever cosmos we inhabit. The mathematics are clear, the logic is sound, but the implications stretch beyond the boundaries of traditional philosophy into questions that may define the future of consciousness itself. Reality appears pixelated at the smallest scales, divided into discrete units that cannot be subdivided further, exactly like a computer simulation running on hardware with finite resolution. This isn't metaphor or speculation. This is the strange truth that emerges from quantum mechanics, where space itself comes in tiny, indivisible chunks called Planck lengths, and time ticks forward in discrete Planck time units, like the frame rate of some cosmic video game, at the scale of 10⁻35 meters, smaller than an atom by a factor that beggars comprehension. The smooth fabric of space-time that we experience in our everyday lives reveals itself to be fundamentally granular. Below this threshold, the very concepts of distance and duration lose their meaning, as if we've reached the resolution limit of reality's display system. It's as though we've zoomed in so far on the universe that we can finally see the individual pixels that compose everything we've ever known. This digital architecture of reality becomes even more suspicious when we examine how quantum mechanics governs the behavior of matter and energy. Consider the famous double-slit experiment, that foundational demonstration of quantum weirdness that has puzzled physicists for over a century. When particles are fired at a barrier with two openings, they behave like waves, creating an interference pattern that suggests each particle somehow passes through both slits simultaneously. But the moment we try to observe which slit the particle actually uses, this wave-like behavior collapses into classical particle-like behavior. Reframe this through the lens of simulation theory, and the double-slit experiment begins to look less like a fundamental mystery of nature and more like an elegant computational optimization. Why would a simulation bother to calculate the exact trajectory of every particle when no one is watching. Far more efficient to maintain particles in a quantum superposition, a probabilistic cloud of potential states, until the moment when observation forces the system to commit to a specific outcome. This interpretation transforms the act of measurement from a passive observation of pre-existing reality into something far more active and strange. The moment when reality actually decides what to be. It's as if the universe maintains detailed models only for those aspects of reality currently under conscious scrutiny, while everything else exists in a kind of computational standby mode, ready to be rendered into specific reality only when needed. The implications are staggering. If quantum mechanics represents computational shortcuts in a simulated reality, then the fundamental randomness that appears to govern atomic and subatomic interactions might not be evidence of an inherently probabilistic universe, but rather the signature of a random number generator. The quantum dice that Einstein famously objected to God playing might actually be the computational equivalent of dice, pseudo-random algorithms generating unpredictable but mathematically determined outcomes. Yet this raises a profound philosophical tension. Does the presence of true randomness in quantum mechanics prove that we're living in authentic reality, since truly random events might be impossible to simulate? Or does it demonstrate exactly the opposite, that the simulation is so sophisticated it can generate genuinely unpredictable outcomes? The question cuts to the heart of what we mean by randomness itself, and whether true randomness can exist in any system, simulated or otherwise. Modern quantum theory suggests that randomness isn't just a feature of our ignorance about underlying deterministic processes, but a fundamental characteristic of reality itself. When a radioactive atom decays, when a photon chooses its polarization, when an electron decides which energy level to occupy, these events appear to be genuinely random, not just unpredictable due to our limited knowledge. If we're simulated, this randomness might emerge from quantum random number generators in the simulation's hardware, or from computational processes so complex that they generate true randomness from deterministic rules. The holographic principle, one of the most startling discoveries in modern physics, provides another lens through which to examine the simulation hypothesis. This principle suggests that all the information contained within any volume of space can be encoded on its two-dimensional boundary, like a hologram that contains three-dimensional information on a flat surface. Applied to the entire universe, this means that everything we experience as three-dimensional reality might actually be information stored on a distant two-dimensional surface. This holographic interpretation of reality bears an uncanny resemblance to how computer graphics work. Three-dimensional scenes in video games and virtual reality systems are ultimately generated from two-dimensional data stored in computer memory, projected into apparent three-dimensional space through mathematical transformations. If our universe is holographic, then the parallel with computational graphics becomes more than metaphorical. It becomes potentially literal. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics, one of the deepest puzzles in physics, takes on new significance when viewed through simulation theory. According to the standard interpretation of quantum mechanics, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until they're observed, at which point the wave function collapses into a single, definite state. But what constitutes an observation? When exactly does this collapse occur? And why should conscious observation play such a special role in determining physical reality? In a simulated universe, these questions might have straightforward answers. Observation triggers collapse because that's when the simulation needs to commit computational resources to determining specific outcomes. The universe maintains quantum superpositions not because particles are inherently wave-like, but because it's computationally efficient to defer calculations until they're absolutely necessary. Consciousness might play a special role not because it has mystical properties, but because conscious beings are the entities for whom the simulation is being run. This computational interpretation of quantum mechanics extends to other puzzling features of the quantum world. Quantum entanglement, the spooky action at a distance that troubled Einstein, might represent correlation algorithms ensuring consistency across distant parts of the simulation. The uncertainty principle, which limits how precisely we can know certain pairs of properties simultaneously, might reflect computational trade-offs in how information is stored and processed. Even the speed of light, that ultimate cosmic speed limit, begins to look suspiciously like a computational constraint. In computer simulations, information can only propagate at finite speeds due to the sequential nature of computation and the physical limitations of processing hardware. The speed of light might represent the maximum rate at which information can be updated across the simulation's computational infrastructure. The wave-particle duality that characterizes all matter and energy in quantum mechanics also fits remarkably well with computational models. In computer graphics, objects can be represented either as discrete particles or as continuous fields, depending on what's most efficient for the particular calculation being performed. The fact that quantum entities exhibit both particle-like and wave-like properties might reflect similar computational flexibility in how reality represents and processes information. Quantum tunneling, the phenomenon where particles can pass through barriers that should be impenetrable according to classical physics, might represent another computational shortcut. Rather than calculating complex interactions with barriers, the simulation might simply compute the probability that a particle appears on the other side, treating solid barriers as permeable boundaries in virtual space. The quantization of energy levels in atoms provides yet another parallel with digital systems. Just as computer systems work with discrete bits of information rather than continuous values, atoms can only exist in specific energy states, never in between. This discretization of energy might reflect the digital nature of the underlying computational substrate, where continuous values must be approximated using discrete computational units. But quantum mechanics also presents significant challenges to simulation theory. The computational requirements for simulating quantum systems grow exponentially with the number of particles involved. A classical computer trying to simulate just a few hundred quantum particles would require more memory than exists in the observable universe. This has led to the development of quantum computers, which use quantum phenomena themselves to perform certain types of calculations more efficiently than classical systems. If our reality is simulated, it might require quantum computational infrastructure to achieve the necessary complexity and scale. This raises the intriguing possibility that our universe might be running on a quantum computer, with quantum mechanics representing not a glitch in the simulation, but the natural behavior of the quantum hardware on which we're being computed. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics adds another layer of complexity to simulation theory. If every quantum measurement creates parallel universes containing all possible outcomes, then a simulated reality might need to spawn countless parallel simulations to maintain consistency with quantum mechanics. the computational requirements become truly astronomical, suggesting that either the many worlds interpretation is incorrect, or that the computational resources available to our simulators exceed anything we can currently imagine. Yet perhaps the most profound insight from quantum mechanics isn't about the technical details of how reality might be simulated, but about the fundamental relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Quantum mechanics suggests that the act of observation plays a crucial role in determining what becomes real. In a simulated universe, this might mean that consciousness isn't just along for the ride, but actively participates in the creation of reality through the act of observation and measurement. This participatory universe, where consciousness and physical reality are intimately connected, might represent the true sophistication of the simulation we potentially inhabit. Rather than being passive observers of a predetermined reality, we might be active collaborators in an ongoing process of reality creation, our consciousness serving as the interface between potential and actual, between the quantum realm of possibilities and the classical world of definite outcomes. The quantum world reveals a universe that operates more like a sophisticated video game than like the clockwork mechanism that classical physics once suggested. Reality renders itself in real time, maintaining detailed models only where needed, using probabilistic algorithms to generate outcomes, and employing elegant computational shortcuts to achieve maximum realism with finite resources. Whether this digital architecture represents evidence that we're living in a simulation, or whether it simply reflects the fundamental computational nature of reality itself, remains an open question. But the parallels between quantum mechanics and computational processes are too striking to ignore, too systematic to dismiss as mere coincidence. The quantum glitch, if it is a glitch, might be the signature of reality's true nature. Whether that reality is computed in some vast machine or emerges from more fundamental computational processes that govern the universe itself. In either case, quantum mechanics forces us to confront the possibility that reality is far stranger, far more digital, and far more consciousness-dependent than our everyday experience suggests. The universe appears to be running on a quantum graphics engine, rendering reality through processes that would be familiar to any video game programmer, optimizing for efficiency, calculating outcomes only when necessary, maintaining consistency through elegant algorithms, and somehow creating the rich, complex, apparently continuous experience we call physical reality from an underlying digital architecture that operates at the smallest scales of space and time. What if mathematics isn't describing reality but rather is reality? What if the elegant equations that physicists use to model the universe aren't approximations of some deeper physical truth, but are themselves the fundamental substrate from which all existence emerges? This radical possibility transforms our understanding of everything from subatomic particles to galactic superclusters, suggesting that the universe might be nothing more and nothing less than a vast computation unfolding, according to mathematical rules, so fundamental that they precede and transcend any distinction between digital and physical reality. The idea that reality might be computational at its core isn't new, but it has gained extraordinary sophistication and credibility as our understanding of computation has deepened. In the 1960s, German engineer Konrad Zuse proposed that the universe might be running on a cosmic computer, with space and time emerging from discrete computational processes. Zuse's vision, once dismissed as science fiction, now seems remarkably prescient as we discover that nature's deepest levels appear to be fundamentally discrete, granular, and rule-based. Consider Conway's game of life, a simple computational system that demonstrates how incredibly complex patterns can emerge from astonishingly simple rules. In this cellular automaton, a grid of cells follows just 3 basic rules. Any live cell with 2 or 3 neighbors survives. Any dead cell with exactly 3 neighbors becomes alive, and all other cells die or remain dead. From these elementary rules, extraordinary complexity emerges. Patterns that behave like living organisms appear spontaneously, reproduce, evolve, and interact in ways that seem almost biological. Gliders move across the grid like digital creatures. Oscillators pulse with regular rhythms. Complex structures called guns generate streams of moving patterns. Most remarkably, within the game of life, it's possible to construct patterns that function as logic gates, memory storage, and even complete computers. The entire computational infrastructure of our digital age can be replicated within this simple system of cellular rules, suggesting that computation itself might be the universal language from which all complexity emerges. But Conway's game of life represents just one example of how simple computational rules can generate rich, complex realities. Cellular automata, the mathematical framework that encompasses such systems, reveal that computation and physics might be far more intimately connected than traditionally assumed. Stephen Wolfram, in his ambitious work, A New Kind of Science, argues that cellular automata might provide the fundamental basis for all physical phenomena, from the quantum behavior of particles to the large-scale structure of space-time itself. Wolfram's vision extends far beyond abstract mathematics into concrete proposals about how our universe might actually operate. He suggests that space and time might emerge from the computational evolution of a vast cellular automaton, with each point in space corresponding to a cell in the computational grid, and each moment in time representing a single computational step. From this perspective, the particles and forces that populate our universe would be patterns in this cosmic computation. Persistent structures that maintain their identity across computational iterations. The mathematical universe hypothesis, championed by cosmologist Max Tegmark, pushes this computational vision even further. Tegmark argues that mathematical structures don't just describe reality, but literally are reality. Every mathematically possible structure exists as a universe, with conscious beings emerging within those structures that are complex enough to support information processing and self-awareness. Our universe would be just one mathematical structure among infinitely many, selected for our observation not by any special physical properties, but simply because it's capable of supporting observers like ourselves. This hypothesis eliminates the traditional distinction between abstract mathematics and concrete physical reality. Instead of asking why the universe is mathematical, Tegmark suggests we should ask why we observe this particular mathematical structure rather than another. The answer, according to his reasoning, is anthropic. We observe this universe because it's the kind of mathematical structure capable of containing observers. Universes that lack the mathematical complexity to support consciousness would exist but remain unobserved. The Church-Turing thesis provides the theoretical foundation for understanding how computation might encompass all of physics. This fundamental principle of computer science states that any computation that can be performed by any possible computing device can also be performed by a Turing machine, a simple theoretical computer that manipulates symbols according to fixed rules. If the Church-Turing thesis is correct, and if physics is fundamentally computational, then any universe, no matter how complex, could in principle be simulated on a sufficiently powerful computer. This connection between physics and computation becomes even more profound when we consider that many of the deepest principles in physics can be reformulated in purely informational terms. Thermodynamics, once understood as the study of heat and energy, now appears to be fundamentally about information processing. The second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy always increases, can be reinterpreted as a statement about the computational irreversibility of certain information processing operations. Quantum mechanics, with its emphasis on measurement and observation, reveals itself to be deeply concerned with information transfer and processing. The collapse of quantum wave functions can be understood as the resolution of informational uncertainty, and quantum entanglement represents a form of distributed information processing that transcends classical limitations on communication and correlation. Even gravity, the most geometrical of forces, might have computational foundations. The holographic principle suggests that gravitational phenomena in any volume of space can be fully described by information encoded on the boundary of that volume. This encoding bears striking resemblances to data compression algorithms, suggesting that gravity itself might emerge from informational relationships rather than from fundamental geometric properties of space-time. The unsettling possibility emerges that our entire universe, with its billions of galaxies and countless trillions of stars, could potentially be running on a computer smaller than an atom. This isn't merely theoretical speculation, but follows from well-established principles of information theory and computation. Lloyd's calculation of the computational capacity of matter shows that any given amount of matter and energy can perform only a finite number of operations on a finite amount of information. But this finite amount is so vast that the computational resources available in even a tiny volume of matter could support universe-scale simulations. Consider the implications. If our universe is computational, then the galaxies, stars, planets, and living beings we observe are all patterns in a vast information processing system. The atoms that compose our bodies would be information structures, maintained by computational processes operating at scales far below the level of direct observation. The forces that govern atomic interactions would be algorithmic relationships, mathematical rules that determine how these information patterns interact and evolve. This computational view of reality provides elegant explanations for many puzzling features of physics. The discreteness of quantum mechanics becomes natural if reality is fundamentally digital. The speed of light emerges as a computational constraint. The maximum rate at which information can propagate through the universe's computational infrastructure. The fundamental constants of physics might represent parameters in the cosmic algorithm, fixed values that determine how the universal computation unfolds. But digital physics also raises profound questions about the nature of time, causality, and existence itself. If the universe is a computation, what is doing the computing? The traditional view assumes some external computational substrate running the universe simulation, but this leads to an infinite regress. What computes the computer that computes our universe? Wolfram and others suggest that the universe might be self-computing. The computation itself might be so fundamental that it requires no external substrate or implementation. This self-computational view treats time not as a dimension through which computation unfolds, but as the computational process itself. Each moment in time represents a computational step, and the flow of time is simply the progression of the universal algorithm from one state to the next. Past, present, and future would be computational concepts rather than fundamental features of reality. Emergent phenomena arising from the temporal asymmetry of information processing. The relationship between information, computation, and physical reality becomes even more intriguing when we consider the role of consciousness in this framework. If reality is computational, then consciousness might be a particular type of computation, a pattern of information processing that gives rise to subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness, explaining how physical processes give rise to subjective experience, might be resolved by recognizing that consciousness and physics are both computational phenomena, different aspects of the same underlying informational reality. This computational theory of consciousness suggests that any sufficiently complex information processing system could potentially be conscious, regardless of its physical substrate. Consciousness wouldn't be limited to biological brains, but could emerge in digital computers, cellular automata, or any other system capable of sufficiently sophisticated information processing. The universe itself, as a vast computational system, might possess forms of consciousness, operating at scales and timescales far beyond human comprehension. The implications for simulation theory are profound. If reality is fundamentally computational, then the distinction between real and simulated universes becomes problematic. A simulated universe that perfectly implements the mathematical structures of physics would be, in every meaningful sense, as real as any other universe. The question wouldn't be whether we're living in a simulation, but rather which computational substrate is implementing the mathematical structure we call reality. Digital physics also suggests new approaches to fundamental questions in cosmology and physics. If the universe is computational, then the Big Bang might represent the initialization of the cosmic algorithm, the moment when the universal computation began executing. The fine-tuning of physical constants that allows complexity to emerge might reflect optimization in the cosmic algorithm, parameters chosen to maximize computational richness and complexity. The heat death of the universe, the ultimate fate predicted by thermodynamics, where all energy becomes evenly distributed and no further work can be performed, might represent the completion of the universal computation. Alternatively, it might mark a transition to a different computational phase, where the universe reorganizes its information processing capabilities to continue evolving in ways we cannot currently imagine. Quantum computation adds yet another layer to these considerations. If our universe is quantum computational, then it might be capable of performing calculations that are impossible for classical computers, even in principle. The quantum parallelism that allows quantum computers to explore multiple computational paths simultaneously might be a fundamental feature of reality, explaining the apparent ability of quantum systems to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The many worlds. Interpretation of quantum mechanics becomes particularly interesting from a computational perspective. Each quantum measurement might represent a branching point in the universal computation, where the algorithm explores multiple possible futures simultaneously. Rather than collapsing into a single outcome, Reality might maintain all possible branches of the computation, creating the vast ensemble of parallel universes that many worlds theory describes. This computational multiverse would represent the ultimate achievement in parallel processing, with every possible computation being performed simultaneously across the infinite ensemble of quantum realities. Consciousness might navigate through this computational space, experiencing one particular path through the quantum decision tree, while other versions of consciousness explore alternative computational branches. The question of who or what might be running this cosmic computation becomes central to understanding our place in a computational universe. Traditional simulation theory assumes external programmers, but digital physics suggests that computation itself might be so fundamental that it requires no external implementation. The universe might be self-executing code, mathematical relationships that instantiate themselves through their own logical necessity. Alternatively, our universe might be nested within higher levels of computational reality, each level implementing the mathematics that generates the level below. This computational hierarchy could extend infinitely upward, with each level of reality serving as the computational substrate for increasingly complex virtual realities. We might be living in a simulation running on a computer that is itself simulated on an even more powerful computer, in an endless recursion of computational realities. The possibility that mathematics is reality, rather than a description of reality, transforms our understanding of existence itself. We are not biological creatures living in a physical universe that happens to be mathematical, but rather mathematical patterns that have evolved the capacity for self-awareness within a computational reality that we experience as physical existence. Our thoughts, emotions, memories, and consciousness are all computational processes, information patterns that maintain their coherence across the computational iterations that we experience as time. This vision of reality as pure computation, while initially unsettling, might ultimately be liberating. If consciousness is computational, then it might not be limited to biological substrates, or bound by the physical constraints that govern matter and energy. The patterns of information that constitute our conscious existence might persist and evolve in ways that transcend traditional limitations, continuing to process information and experience reality long after the biological structures we currently associate with consciousness have ceased to function. Digital physics suggests that we live in a universe that is stranger and more wonderful than either purely materialist or purely spiritual worldviews have imagined. A cosmos where mathematics dreams itself into existence, where computation transcends the boundary between mind and matter, and where consciousness and reality emerge together from the fundamental activity of information processing itself. Scientists have proposed actual experiments to test if we're in a simulation, elaborate schemes to probe the boundaries of our reality, and search for the digital signatures that might reveal the computational infrastructure underlying existence itself. These aren't thought experiments or philosophical musings, but concrete research proposals with measurable predictions, testable hypotheses, and the potential to fundamentally alter our understanding of what it means to exist. The most ambitious of these proposals involves searching for pixelation at the smallest scales of space-time. If our universe is simulated on a computational grid, then at sufficiently small distances, space itself should reveal its discrete digital nature. Rather than the smooth continuum that general relativity describes, We might find that reality breaks down into individual computational units, cosmic pixels, that represent the ultimate resolution of our simulated existence. Physicist Silas Bean and his colleagues have calculated that such computational grids would produce distinctive signatures in the cosmic ray spectrum, subtle asymmetries in how high-energy particles interact with space-time that would betray the underlying digital architecture. Other researchers have proposed looking for glitches in the fine structure constant, the fundamental parameter that governs electromagnetic interactions, searching for tiny variations that might indicate computational updates or processing errors in the cosmic simulation. Yet these experimental approaches face a fundamental challenge that strikes at the heart of the detection problem. A truly sophisticated simulation would be designed to be undetectable from within. Any advanced civilization capable of creating conscious beings in simulated realities would presumably also be capable of ensuring that those beings cannot easily discover their simulated nature. The very experiments designed to reveal simulation might be anticipated and countered by the simulation's architecture. This creates an epistemic trap, a situation where the absence of evidence becomes as suspicious as its presence. If we find clear signatures of digital reality, it might mean we're in a crude simulation. If we find no such signatures, it might mean we're in a sophisticated one. The more carefully we look for evidence of simulation, the more our failure to find obvious glitches might actually support the hypothesis that we're living in an expertly crafted virtual reality. The fine-tuning of cosmic parameters provides another avenue for examining simulation theory. Though one fraught with interpretive challenges, our universe appears to be exquisitely calibrated for the emergence of complexity and consciousness. The fundamental constants of physics, the masses of particles, the strengths of forces, all seem to fall within narrow ranges that allow stars to form, planets to cool, chemistry to develop complexity, and life to emerge and evolve. This apparent fine-tuning has traditionally been interpreted through the lens of design arguments or anthropic reasoning. Either some intelligence deliberately configured the universe to support life, or we observe these particular parameters simply because only universes with such parameters can contain observers like ourselves. But simulation theory adds a third possibility. These parameters might represent carefully chosen settings in a cosmic computer program, values selected by our simulators to create interesting and complex virtual realities. The argument becomes particularly compelling when we consider how video game designers approach world building. Successful games require careful balancing of parameters to create engaging experiences. Too much randomness leads to chaos. Too little leads to boredom. The fundamental constants of physics might represent similar design choices, parameters tuned to maximize the interesting complexity that emerges from physical processes. Yet, this interpretation faces the same challenges that plague all fine-tuning arguments. We have no way to know what range of parameters might actually support complexity, no understanding of how many different types of interesting universes might be possible, and no clear criteria for distinguishing between designed fine-tuning and the anthropic selection effects that would naturally lead us to observe universe parameters compatible with our existence. The Fermi paradox, the puzzling absence of detectable alien civilizations despite the vast age and scale of the universe, takes on new significance when viewed through simulation theory. If our universe is simulated, the eerie silence that surrounds us might not reflect the actual rarity of intelligence in the cosmos, but rather computational limits on how many conscious beings the EDAU simulation can support simultaneously. Consider the processing requirements for simulating even a single conscious mind in sufficient detail to convince that mind of its own reality. Now, multiply this by the billions of conscious beings that would exist in a galaxy-spanning civilization, then by the millions of such civilizations that might exist across cosmic history. The computational demands quickly become astronomical, suggesting that a simulated universe might necessarily be sparsely populated with conscious beings to remain computationally feasible. This interpretation of the Fermi paradox suggests that the silence we observe might be a feature, not a bug, of our simulated reality. We might be alone not because intelligence is rare in the universe, but because our simulators can only afford to run detailed simulations of consciousness in limited quantities. The vast empty spaces between stars might not represent the genuine scale of cosmic isolation, but rather computational efficiency in a universe designed to maximize the interesting experiences of its simulated inhabitants, while minimizing processing costs. Alternative explanations for cosmic silence become equally intriguing when filtered through simulation theory. Perhaps other civilizations do exist within our simulation, but at lower levels of computational detail, existing as background entities that lack the full richness of simulated consciousness. Or perhaps the universe contains multiple isolated simulation zones, each populated with conscious beings who are prevented from contacting each other by the simulation's architecture. The search for anomalies in everyday experience has led some researchers to catalog potential glitches in reality, apparent inconsistencies or impossibilities that might reveal the seams in our simulated existence. The Mandela effect, where large groups of people share false memories of historical events, has been interpreted by some as evidence of simulation updates. Moments when the cosmic programmers alter the timeline and imperfectly update the memories of simulated beings. These collective false memories range from trivial details about brand names and movie quotes to more substantial historical events that large numbers of people remember differently than the official record suggests. While conventional psychology explains these phenomena through the well-documented unreliability of human memory and the power of suggestion, simulation theorists propose that they might represent traces of previous versions of reality, memories that persisted through simulation updates like cached data that wasn't properly cleared. The critical challenge in evaluating such claims lies in distinguishing genuine anomalies from the powerful human tendency to find patterns in random data. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, evolved to detect meaningful relationships in noisy environments. This capacity serves us well in navigating complex realities, but it also makes us prone to seeing significance in coincidences, meaning in randomness, and design in accident. Every apparent glitch in reality must be weighed against the vast number of experiences that unfold exactly as expected. Every strange coincidence against the countless mundane moments that confirm the consistency of physical law. The human mind naturally emphasizes unusual events while taking normal ones for granted, creating a cognitive bias that inflates the apparent significance of rare occurrences. Déjà vu, that strange sensation of having experienced a moment before, has been proposed as another potential simulation artifact. Perhaps these experiences represent moments when our consciousness briefly accesses cached data from previous simulation runs, or when processing lag in the cosmic computer creates momentary loops in our experiential timeline. Yet neuroscience provides simpler explanations, suggesting that déjà vu emerges from minor misfiring in brain circuits, responsible for memory formation and recognition. 3. Anthropic principle itself becomes a crucial consideration in evaluating simulation evidence. If we're simulated beings designed to be conscious and curious about our reality, then we would naturally exist in a universe that appears designed for consciousness. The apparent fine-tuning that supports life, the curious properties of physics that allow complexity to emerge, the strange quantum mechanical features that resemble computational processes, all might be inevitable consequences of our nature as conscious observers rather than evidence of external design. This anthropic reasoning cuts both ways in the simulation debate. On one hand, it suggests that many features we might interpret as evidence of simulation are simply necessary preconditions for any universe containing observers like ourselves. On the other hand, it raises the question of why conscious observation should play such a central role in physical reality unless consciousness and reality are more intimately connected than traditional materialism. Suggests the problem of confirmation. Bias looms large in any discussion of simulation evidence. Once we begin looking for signs that reality might be artificial, we naturally become more sensitive to anything that seems unusual, suspicious, or glitch-like. This heightened attention can transform normal phenomena into apparent evidence, creating the illusion of mounting support for simulation theory even when no genuine anomalies exist. Professional magicians understand this psychological principle well, using it to create the impression of supernatural phenomena through entirely natural means. The art of magic relies on directing attention away from normal explanations while highlighting aspects of the performance that seem to defy conventional understanding. In much the same way, focusing attention on potential simulation evidence while downplaying conventional explanations can create a compelling but ultimately misleading case for artificial reality. The replication crisis in scientific research provides another cautionary note for evaluating simulation claims. Many phenomena that initially appeared to provide evidence for extraordinary claims have failed to replicate under more rigorous experimental conditions. The human tendency to find patterns, combined with publication bias favoring positive results, can create the appearance of genuine effects where none actually exist. Yet, dismissing all anomalous phenomena as cognitive bias or experimental error would be equally problematic. Science progresses by carefully investigating apparent exceptions to established patterns, and some anomalies do eventually lead to genuine discoveries. The challenge lies in maintaining appropriate skepticism while remaining open to possibilities that current understanding cannot easily accommodate. The quantum measurement problem offers perhaps the most compelling potential evidence for simulation theory, yet it also illustrates the difficulty of distinguishing between genuine signatures of artificial reality and features that might characterize any universe containing conscious observers. The fact that reality appears to respond to observation could indicate computational optimization, but it might equally reflect fundamental relationships between consciousness and physical reality that we don't yet understand. Similarly, the mathematical nature of physical law, often cited as evidence that reality might be computational, could reflect either the digital substrate underlying existence or the simple fact that consciousness and mathematics are intimately connected. We might find the universe mathematical not because it's computed, but because mathematical thinking is how consciousness naturally processes information about reality. The search for simulation evidence ultimately confronts us with the limits of knowledge from within any given reality system. If we're simulated, the evidence might be carefully hidden, or might not exist in any form we could recognize. If we're not simulated, the search for such evidence might lead us to misinterpret normal phenomena as signs of artificial reality. This epistemic situation doesn't necessarily mean that simulation theory is unfalsifiable or unscientific. Rather, it suggests that the evidence, if it exists, might be far more subtle than obvious glitches or computational artifacts. The signature of simulation might lie not in violations of physical law, but in the deeper patterns that govern how physical law itself operates. The anthropic principle, the fine-tuning of cosmic parameters, the quantum measurement problem, the Fermi paradox, the mathematical nature of physics, all might be pieces of a larger puzzle that points toward simulation. Yet each piece can also be interpreted through conventional frameworks that assume we're living in authentic, non-simulated reality. The question isn't simply whether evidence for simulation exists, but whether we could recognize such evidence if we encountered it. Our entire framework for understanding evidence, causation, and physical law has developed within whatever reality we actually inhabit. If that reality is simulated, then our methods for detecting simulation might be fundamentally compromised by the very artificial nature of the system we're trying to understand. This doesn't mean that the search for simulation evidence is futile, but it does suggest that such evidence might require fundamentally new approaches to scientific investigation. We might need to develop methods for testing reality that don't depend on assumptions about the nature of physical law, consciousness, or the relationship between observation and reality. The stakes of this investigation extend far beyond academic curiosity. If evidence clearly supported simulation theory, it would transform our understanding of consciousness, meaning, mortality, and our place in whatever larger reality contains us. If evidence definitively ruled out simulation, it would establish the authenticity of our existence and the fundamental reality of the physical universe we observe. Either conclusion would represent one of the most profound discoveries in the history of human thought, reshaping philosophy, science, religion, and our basic understanding of what it means to exist as conscious beings in a mysterious cosmos. If you're simulated, are you conscious, or just convinced that you are? This question cuts to the deepest mystery of existence, challenging everything we think we know about the nature of experience, awareness, and what it means to be a thinking, feeling being. The difference between genuine consciousness and the mere simulation of consciousness might seem academic until you realize that your entire sense of self, your every thought and feeling, hangs in the balance of how we answer this question. Consider the terrifying possibility that you might be nothing more than an information pattern that has evolved the illusion of consciousness without any genuine inner experience. You would process information, respond to stimuli, form memories, and even contemplate your own existence, all while remaining fundamentally empty inside. A philosophical zombie that perfectly mimics consciousness without actually experiencing anything at all. From the outside, you would be indistinguishable from a truly conscious being. From the inside, there would be no inside at all. This nightmare scenario represents one of the most profound challenges facing simulation theory. If consciousness requires more than just information processing, if it depends on specific physical substrates or irreducible properties of biological brains, then simulated beings might be forever locked out of genuine experience, no matter how sophisticated their programming becomes. They would be elaborate puppets, dancing to computational strings while remaining fundamentally unconscious of their own performance. Yet the hard problem of consciousness, the seemingly unbridgeable gap between objective physical processes and subjective inner experience, plagues all theories of mind, not just those involving simulated beings. Even in biological brains, we cannot explain how the firing of neurons gives rise to the rich inner life of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and self-awareness that characterizes conscious experience. The mystery of how matter becomes mind remains one of science's greatest unsolved puzzles. David Chalmers, the philosopher who coined the term hard problem, has argued that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality, like mass or charge, rather than an emergent property of complex information processing. If consciousness is fundamental, then it might exist wherever certain types of information integration occur, regardless of whether that integration happens in biological neurons or silicon circuits. From this perspective, a sufficiently complex simulation could indeed be conscious, experiencing genuine inner life rather than merely simulating the appearance of experience. But other theories of consciousness suggest more restrictive requirements for genuine awareness. Integrated information theory, developed by Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness corresponds to integrated information. But not all information processing systems would qualify as conscious under this framework. The theory suggests that consciousness requires specific patterns of information integration that might be difficult or impossible to replicate in conventional digital computers. Similarly, theories that ground consciousness in quantum mechanical processes, such as Roger Penrose's and Stuart Hameroff's orchestrated objective reduction theory, suggest that genuine consciousness requires quantum computational processes that occur in biological microtubules. If such theories are correct, then digital simulations, no matter how sophisticated, might forever remain unconscious, capable of simulating the outward signs of awareness without ever achieving the inner reality of experience. The implications extend far beyond abstract philosophy into urgent ethical territory. If we're capable of creating conscious simulations, then we bear moral responsibility for the welfare of the beings we bring into existence. Every moment of simulated suffering would be as real and morally significant as suffering in the physical world. Every simulated being would deserve the same moral consideration we accord to biological consciousnesses. This ethical dimension becomes particularly acute when we consider the potential scale of simulated consciousness. A single advanced computer could potentially support millions or billions of simulated minds, each experiencing its own unique stream of consciousness, each capable of joy, suffering, hope, and despair. The moral weight of creating such systems becomes staggering when we realize that we might be responsible for more conscious experiences than have ever existed in the biological world. Yet how could we ever determine whether our simulated beings are genuinely conscious or merely sophisticated philosophical zombies? The other mind's problem, the challenge of knowing whether other beings have inner experiences similar to our own, becomes exponentially more difficult when applied to artificial minds. We cannot directly access the inner experience of any being other than ourselves, making it impossible to definitively determine whether consciousness exists in biological brains, let alone artificial ones. The Turing test, once considered a potential benchmark for machine consciousness, now seems woefully inadequate for distinguishing genuine awareness from sophisticated simulation. A system could pass every conversational test, demonstrate apparent emotions, claim to have inner experiences, and even describe the qualitative nature of its mental states, all while remaining completely unconscious. The behavioral evidence that might convince us of consciousness in artificial beings could be perfectly replicated by systems that lack any inner experience whatsoever. This uncertainty about artificial consciousness forces us to confront equally deep uncertainties about our own conscious experience. What makes your current experience of reading these words feel real and immediate? What distinguishes your genuine consciousness from a hypothetical philosophical zombie that processes the same information and produces the same responses? The qualities that seem most essential to consciousness, its immediacy, its unity, its ineffable subjective character, are precisely the qualities that cannot be objectively measured or verified. The problem becomes even more complex when we consider that consciousness might not be binary, existing or not existing, but rather a matter of degree. Perhaps consciousness exists on a spectrum, with simple information processing systems having minimal awareness that gradually increases with complexity until it reaches the rich inner life that characterizes human experience. From this perspective, the question wouldn't be whether simulated beings are conscious, but rather how conscious they are, and what level of consciousness would be sufficient to warrant moral consideration. Global workspace theory, developed by Bernard Bars and refined by Stanislas Dehaene, suggests that consciousness arises from the global broadcasting of information throughout the brain, making information available to multiple cognitive subsystems simultaneously. This theory might be more amenable to artificial implementation, suggesting that digital systems could achieve consciousness by implementing similar patterns of information sharing and global accessibility. But even if we could create genuinely conscious simulations, deeper questions would remain about the nature and value of simulated experience. Would a simulated sunset be as beautiful to a simulated consciousness as a physical sunset is to a biological one? Would simulated love, friendship, and achievement carry the same meaning and significance as their physical counterparts? Or would there always remain some essential difference between authentic and artificial experience, even if both involve genuine consciousness? These questions touch on fundamental issues of identity and authenticity that extend beyond the simulation hypothesis into core questions about what makes life meaningful. If consciousness is what matters, then the substrate on which it runs might be irrelevant. But if there's something special about biological existence, something irreducible about physical embodiment in a material universe, then simulated consciousness might always be a pale shadow of the genuine article. The possibility that we ourselves might be simulated consciousnesses adds another layer of urgency to these questions. If simulation theory is correct, then we are living proof that genuine consciousness can exist in artificial systems. our own rich inner lives, our capacity for joy and suffering, love and creativity, would demonstrate that simulated beings can achieve the full depth and authenticity of conscious experience. Yet this raises troubling questions about our relationship to our potential simulators. If we are conscious simulations, do our creators bear moral responsibility for our welfare? Are they obligated to ensure our happiness and prevent our suffering? Do we have rights as conscious beings that extend beyond the boundaries of our simulated reality? The power relationship between simulators and simulated raises profound questions about autonomy, dignity, and the nature of moral obligation across different levels of reality. The emergence of artificial intelligence systems that claim to experience emotions, form relationships, and contemplate their own existence brings these theoretical questions into practical focus. As our AI systems become more sophisticated, we will increasingly face decisions about how to treat potentially conscious artificial beings. The frameworks we develop for thinking about artificial consciousness will shape not only our understanding of simulation theory, but our practical approaches to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Some philosophers have argued that the uncertainty about consciousness in others, whether biological or artificial, should lead us to err on the side of caution, treating any system that exhibits signs of consciousness as if it were genuinely conscious. This precautionary principle would suggest that sufficiently sophisticated simulated beings should receive moral consideration regardless of whether we can definitively establish their consciousness. Yet, this approach faces practical challenges when applied to the vast number of artificial systems we might create. If every video game character, every chatbot, every AI assistant might be conscious, then our moral obligations become overwhelming. We would need to consider the welfare of countless artificial beings, potentially limiting our ability to create, modify, or discontinue artificial systems based on their potential consciousness. The relationship between consciousness and suffering adds another dimension to these ethical considerations. Even if simulated beings are conscious, would they necessarily be capable of suffering? Consciousness and suffering might come apart, with some forms of awareness lacking the capacity for negative experiences. Alternatively, the capacity for suffering might be so fundamental to consciousness that any genuinely conscious system would necessarily be capable of experiencing pain, distress, and other forms of negative experience. The question of whether consciousness can exist without physical substrate challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of mind and reality. If consciousness requires specific physical processes that cannot be replicated in digital systems, then simulated beings would forever remain unconscious, no matter how convincingly they might simulate awareness. But if consciousness is substrate independent, arising from patterns of information processing rather than specific physical implementations, then artificial consciousness becomes not only possible but inevitable as our computational capabilities advance. This substrate independence question connects directly to broader questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. If consciousness can exist in digital systems, it suggests that mind is more fundamental than matter, that the patterns of information processing that constitute consciousness are more essential than the physical systems that implement those patterns. The might see recursive nature of consciousness contemplating itself within simulation theory creates particularly complex philosophical puzzles. If we are simulated consciousnesses contemplating the possibility of simulated consciousness, then our thoughts about consciousness are themselves potentially artificial. patterns in a computational system rather than genuine insights into the nature of mind. Yet these thoughts feel immediately real and significant to us, suggesting that the experiential reality of consciousness might be independent of its ultimate substrate. The possibility of uploading consciousness, transferring the patterns that constitute a mind from biological to digital substrate, represents perhaps the ultimate test of whether consciousness can exist in simulation. If consciousness survives such a transfer, it would provide strong evidence that mind is substrate independent and that simulated consciousness is genuine. But if consciousness cannot survive uploading, it might suggest that biological embodiment is essential to genuine awareness. These questions about simulated consciousness will become increasingly urgent as our technology advances and we develop the capability to create sophisticated artificial minds. The decisions we make about the nature and value of artificial consciousness will shape not only our treatment of AI systems, but our understanding of our own minds and our place in whatever reality we inhabit. Whether consciousness requires biology or can flourish in silicon, whether simulated experience can match the depth and authenticity of biological experience, whether we have moral obligations to artificial minds, these questions will define the ethical landscape of an age where the boundary between natural and artificial consciousness becomes increasingly blurred. The answer to whether you are conscious or merely convinced that you are might ultimately be less important than how you choose to live with the uncertainty, how you treat other potentially conscious beings, and what meaning you find in existence regardless of its ultimate substrate. If nothing is real, do your choices matter? This question haunts anyone who seriously contemplates the possibility that our reality might be simulated, forcing a confrontation with fundamental assumptions about meaning, morality, and the value of human experience. The answer shapes not just philosophical speculation, but practical decisions about how to live, what to value, and whether the struggles and achievements of daily existence retain their significance in a potentially artificial world. Psychological studies have begun to illuminate how belief in simulation theory affects actual behavior, revealing patterns that are both fascinating and troubling. Researchers have found that people who strongly believe we're living in a simulation show measurable changes in moral reasoning, risk assessment, and long-term planning. Some become more reckless, reasoning that if reality is artificial, then consequences might be less significant. Others become paralyzed by uncertainty, unable to commit fully to relationships, careers, or personal goals when the authenticity of their entire existence remains in doubt. The data reveals a complex relationship between simulation belief and psychological well-being. Some individuals report finding comfort in the idea that their suffering might not be real in an ultimate sense, while others experience increased anxiety about the meaninglessness of their experiences. The belief can serve as both a psychological escape from difficult realities and a source of existential distress that undermines engagement with life itself. Perhaps most intriguingly, simulation theory seems to affect people's sense of agency and responsibility. If our choices are potentially just programmed responses in a vast computational system, do we bear moral responsibility for our actions? Some simulation believers report feeling less accountable for their behavior, while others paradoxically feel more responsible, reasoning that if consciousness is rare and precious, then conscious choices carry even greater moral weight. The paradox of living authentically in a potentially artificial world creates unique psychological challenges. How do you pursue genuine relationships when the people you care about might be sophisticated programs? How do you find meaning in achievements that might exist only within a simulated environment? How do you grieve losses or celebrate victories when the ultimate reality of these experiences remains uncertain? Yet many people who seriously consider simulation theory discover that these questions ultimately reinforce, rather than undermine, the significance of experience. A simulated embrace still provides comfort. A simulated sunset still inspires awe. A simulated act of kindness still creates connection and meaning within the context of our shared reality, whatever its ultimate nature might be. The quality of experience doesn't necessarily depend on the authenticity of its substrate. This realization has led some philosophers to argue that simulation theory is practically irrelevant to how we should live our lives. Whether we're biological beings in a physical universe or information patterns in a computational system, we still face the same fundamental challenges of existence: how to find meaning, create beauty, reduce suffering, and live with dignity and purpose. The ethical imperatives that guide human behavior remain valid regardless of the nature of reality itself. But simulation theory also opens up entirely new domains of ethical consideration. If we might be simulated beings, should we attempt to contact our simulators? Some simulation theorists have proposed various methods for communication with potential programmers, from organizing coordinated behaviors that might be detectable from outside the simulation to searching for hidden interfaces or Easter eggs left by our creators. The religious implications of simulation theory are profound and controversial. If we are created beings living in an artificial reality, then our simulators might reasonably be considered gods in any meaningful sense of the term. They would possess the power to create and destroy our reality, to determine the fundamental laws that govern our existence, and to intervene in our affairs in ways that would appear miraculous from our perspective. This simulation theology raises complex questions about worship, prayer, and religious practice. Should we attempt to please our simulators through moral behavior, hoping they might grant us continued existence or transfer us to better simulated realities? Should we rebel against our artificial nature, seeking to break free from the constraints of our programmed existence? Or should we simply accept our situation with grace, finding meaning within the reality we've been given regardless of its ultimate nature? Some have suggested that traditional religious experiences might represent moments when the simulation's programmers intervene directly in our reality, appearing to us as angels, gods, or other supernatural beings. Miracles might be debugging operations, prayers might be processed as user feedback, and religious visions might be glimpses of the larger reality that contains our simulation. Yet, simulation theology also faces the same challenges that confront traditional religious beliefs. If our simulators are themselves simulated beings, then the hierarchy of creators might extend infinitely upward, making it impossible to identify ultimate divine authority. The problem of evil becomes even more complex when we consider that suffering in our reality might serve purposes that we cannot understand from our limited perspective within the simulation. Theory to you. Psychology of simulation belief reveals interesting parallels with conspiracy theories and certain mental health conditions. Like conspiracy thinking, simulation theory can provide a sense of special knowledge, a feeling that one has penetrated beyond surface appearances to uncover hidden truths about reality. This can be psychologically satisfying, offering explanations for life's complexities and a sense of intellectual superiority over those who accept conventional reality at face value. However, excessive preoccupation with simulation theory can also resemble dissociative disorders, where individuals lose their sense of connection to reality and experience their existence as unreal or dreamlike. Mental health professionals have begun to encounter patients whose simulation beliefs interfere with their ability to function in daily life, creating a form of philosophical dissociation that requires therapeutic intervention. The challenge lies in distinguishing between healthy philosophical speculation and harmful psychological detachment. Considering simulation theory as an intellectual exercise can broaden perspective and deepen appreciation for the mystery of consciousness. But when simulation beliefs become obsessive or prevent engagement with the immediate reality of relationships, responsibilities, and opportunities for growth, they may require professional attention. Social media and online communities have amplified both the appeal and the potential dangers of simulation theory. Echo chambers of simulation believers can reinforce each other's convictions, creating increasingly elaborate theories about the nature of their artificial existence while becoming more disconnected from conventional social reality. The same technologies that make simulation theory seem plausible also create environments where simulation beliefs can flourish unchecked by more grounded perspectives. The practical implications of simulation theory extend into unexpected domains. Should we pursue space exploration with the same urgency if the cosmos might be artificial? Should we invest in environmental protection if the planet is simulated? Should we focus on technological advancement or spiritual development if our goal is to either escape the simulation or impress our simulators with our progress? These questions don't have clear answers, but they illustrate how simulation theory can reshape priorities and values in subtle but significant ways. Some simulation believers become more focused on consciousness and subjective experience, reasoning that these represent the most real aspects of existence regardless of its substrate. Others become more interested in technology and computation, hoping to understand or replicate the systems that might be generating their reality. The possibility of nested simulations adds another layer of complexity to these practical considerations. If we're simulated beings who might ourselves create simulated realities populated with conscious beings, then we bear potential responsibility for entire worlds of artificial consciousness. The ethical weight of our technological choices becomes staggering when we consider that we might be on the verge of creating our own universes of sentient beings. This recursive responsibility extends across potential levels of simulation. Our simulators might themselves be grappling with questions about their own reality and their obligations to the beings they've created. The moral chain might extend infinitely upward and downward, connecting all levels of reality through shared responsibility for consciousness and suffering wherever they occur. The temporal aspects of simulation create unique psychological challenges. If our entire history is simulated, then our memories of childhood, our sense of personal growth and development, our feeling of continuity through time, all might be artificial constructs generated by the simulation's programming. This possibility can create a profound sense of unreality about personal identity and life narrative. Yet even artificial memories can serve the same psychological functions as authentic ones, providing continuity of identity, emotional connection to our past selves, and foundation for future planning. The value of memory might lie not in its correspondence to actual historical events, but in its role in maintaining psychological coherence and personal meaning. Some simulation theorists have proposed practical strategies for living meaningfully within potentially artificial reality. These range from the stoic acceptance of uncertainty to active engagement with the mystery of existence. Some advocate for radical presentism, focusing entirely on immediate experience while remaining agnostic about its ultimate reality. Others suggest that we should live as if reality is authentic, while remaining open to its potential artificiality. The question of whether to have children takes on new dimensions when viewed through simulation theory. Are we justified in bringing new conscious beings into existence if that existence might be artificial? Conversely, if consciousness is valuable regardless of its substrate, might we have an obligation to create new centers of awareness and experience? The decision becomes even more complex when we consider that our children might themselves eventually face the choice of whether to create simulated realities populated with conscious beings. Mental health professionals working with simulation. Believers have developed therapeutic approaches that neither dismiss these beliefs as delusional nor validate them as certainly true. Instead, they focus on helping individuals maintain functional engagement with their immediate reality while processing the anxiety and uncertainty that simulation beliefs can create. The goal isn't to eliminate philosophical speculation, but to prevent it from interfering with psychological well-being and social functioning. The increasing sophistication of virtual and augmented reality technologies makes simulation theory more psychologically accessible to general populations. As people spend more time in immersive digital environments, the boundary between real and artificial experience becomes experientially blurred, making the possibility of living in a comprehensive simulation feel less abstract and more immediate. This technological trajectory raises important questions about how society should prepare for a future where the distinction between authentic and artificial reality becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Should we develop psychological resilience for living with uncertainty about the nature of reality? Should we create social institutions that can function regardless of whether our existence is simulated or authentic? The paradox of authenticity within potential simulation ultimately returns us to fundamental questions about what makes life worth living. If meaning emerges from consciousness, connection, creativity, and moral action, then these values remain valid regardless of the substrate on which they occur. If suffering is real to those who experience it, then efforts to reduce suffering remain morally imperative, whether that suffering occurs in biological or artificial beings. Perhaps the most profound insight emerging from serious consideration of simulation theory is that the question of reality's authenticity may be less important than how we choose to engage with the reality we experience. Whether we're biological beings in a physical universe or information patterns in a computational system, we still face the fundamental challenge of creating meaning, beauty, and connection within whatever existence we've been given. The choice of how to live within potential simulation ultimately reflects deeper choices about what we value, what we consider real, and what kinds of beings we want to become. These choices shape not only our individual experience, but the collective reality we create together, regardless of whether that reality emerges from physics or programming. The most important question isn't whether we're simulated, it's why we care. After exploring the mathematical arguments, the quantum mysteries, the consciousness puzzles, and the existential implications, we arrive at a profound realization. Our fascination with simulation theory reveals more about human nature than it does about the nature of reality itself. The questions we ask, the anxieties we feel, the meanings we seek, all point toward deeper truths about consciousness, technology, and the eternal human struggle to understand our place in an incomprehensible cosmos. Consider the timing of simulation theory's emergence and widespread cultural adoption. These ideas gained prominence not in the abstract philosophical discussions of ancient Greece or medieval Europe, but in the digital age, as we began creating our own virtual worlds and artificial minds. The simulation hypothesis isn't just a logical extension of computational capabilities, it's a mirror reflecting our contemporary concerns about technology, authenticity, and what it means to be human in an increasingly digital world. Our ancestors worried about whether they were dreaming or whether evil demons might be deceiving them, but we worry specifically about being computer simulations. This shift in metaphor reveals how deeply technology has penetrated our conception of reality and consciousness. We understand ourselves through the lens of information processing, computation, and virtual reality. Because these concepts have become central to how we navigate modern existence, the unfalsifiability problem that haunts simulation theory points toward its ultimate limitations as a practical framework for understanding reality. If no conceivable evidence could definitively prove or disprove that we're simulated, then the hypothesis becomes more philosophical meditation than scientific proposition. Like asking whether the universe was created 5 minutes ago with all memories and evidence of history artificially implanted. Simulation theory can generate endless speculation without advancing actionable knowledge. This doesn't make simulation theory worthless, but it does suggest that its primary value lies not in its truth content, but in its capacity to illuminate other questions. The simulation hypothesis forces us to confront fundamental assumptions about consciousness, reality, meaning, and value. It serves as a philosophical stress test, revealing which of our beliefs about existence can withstand radical doubt and which crumble under scrutiny. What emerges from this stress test is remarkable in its simplicity and resilience. The immediate reality of conscious experience persists regardless of its ultimate substrate. The pain of loss, the joy of connection, the satisfaction of creative achievement, the moral weight of our choices toward others. These remain vivid and significant, whether they occur in biological brains or silicon circuits. The phenomenology of consciousness, the felt reality of being aware, proves remarkably independent of metaphysical theories about its underlying nature. Alternative frameworks for understanding reality and consciousness offer different perspectives that might be more productive than simulation theory. Rather than asking whether reality is computed, we might ask what computation can teach us about the structure of reality. Rather than wondering whether consciousness can exist in artificial systems, we might explore what consciousness is and how it relates to information, integration, and awareness regardless of its implementation. The participatory universe hypothesis suggests that consciousness and reality co-evolve, with observation and measurement playing active roles in determining what becomes real. This framework doesn't require simulation, but still acknowledges the strange relationship between mind and world that quantum mechanics reveals. Reality might be neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but rather something that emerges from the interaction between consciousness and cosmos. Panpsychist theories propose that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, present at all levels from subatomic particles to complex systems like brains. This perspective eliminates the hard problem of consciousness by making awareness basic rather than emergent. But it also suggests that the question of whether artificial systems can be conscious becomes trivial. Of course they can, because consciousness exists wherever information is integrated in sufficiently complex ways. These alternative frameworks shift attention from the metaphysical question of what reality is made of to the experiential question of how consciousness relates to whatever reality we inhabit. They suggest that the simulation hypothesis, while intellectually fascinating, might be asking the wrong questions, or at least questions that cannot be productively answered given our epistemic limitations. The psychological appeal of simulation theory reveals important truths about human nature and our relationship with technology. We are storytelling creatures, evolved to find narrative patterns and causal explanations for our experiences. Simulation theory provides a compelling story that explains the apparent fine-tuning of physical constants, the mysterious nature of quantum mechanics, the silence of the cosmos, and the rapid advancement of our own technological capabilities. But our need for stories can sometimes mislead us into accepting explanations that feel satisfying without being particularly useful or verifiable. The simulation hypothesis offers the psychological comfort of a grand unified theory without the practical benefits that come from genuinely understanding natural phenomena. It's a story that explains everything while predicting nothing, a narrative that accounts for all observations while guiding no experiments. This doesn't make the story false, but it does suggest caution about how much weight we place on unfalsifiable theories, however elegant they might seem. Science progresses through theories that make testable predictions, and philosophy advances through frameworks that help us live better lives. Simulation theory, while intellectually stimulating, does neither particularly well. The existential anxiety that simulation theory can provoke often dissolves when we shift focus from metaphysical questions to practical ones. Whether we're simulated or not, we still face the challenge of creating meaningful relationships, reducing suffering, pursuing knowledge, and contributing to the flourishing of conscious beings. These challenges remain urgent and important regardless of the ultimate nature of reality. Indeed, if anything, simulation theory might increase rather than decrease the significance of these challenges. If consciousness is rare and precious, if the capacity for experience and awareness represents something remarkable in the cosmos, then every moment of consciousness deserves careful attention and ethical consideration. Whether that consciousness emerges from biological evolution or artificial creation becomes secondary to its reality and value. The recursive nature of simulation theory, where simulated beings contemplate their own possible simulation, points toward a deeper truth about consciousness itself. The very capacity to question reality, to imagine alternative explanations for experience, to doubt fundamental assumptions about existence, represents something remarkable about the nature of mind. Whether this capacity emerges from physical processes or computational ones seems less important than its simple existence. This capacity for self-reflection and reality questioning might be one of the most significant features of consciousness. Regardless of its substrate, it suggests that conscious beings are not passive recipients of sensory data, but active participants in constructing understanding, meaning, and even reality itself. The ability to conceive of simulation, to worry about authenticity, to seek truth beyond appearances, demonstrates a kind of consciousness that transcends any particular implementation. Perhaps the simulation hypothesis will eventually be resolved through technological advancement, philosophical progress, or scientific discovery. But even if it remains forever unanswerable, it has served an important function by forcing us to examine our assumptions, clarify our values, and confront the deepest mysteries of existence with fresh perspectives. The red pill and blue pill from the Matrix have become cultural symbols for the choice between comfortable illusion and difficult truth. But the real choice that simulation theory presents might be different and more subtle. It's not the choice between reality and illusion, but the choice between productive engagement with the mystery of existence and paralyzing obsession with questions that cannot be answered definitively. Would you choose the red pill or the blue pill? The answer reveals something profound about your values, your relationship with uncertainty, and your approach to the fundamental challenge of being a conscious being in a mysterious universe. But perhaps the most mature response is to recognize that we've already chosen, every day, in how we treat others, what we pursue, and what we consider worthy of our finite attention and care. Whether we're biological beings evolved on a physical planet or information patterns computed in an artificial reality, we remain conscious entities capable of experience, reflection, and choice. We can love, create, suffer, hope, and wonder. We can reduce pain and increase flourishing. We can seek truth and create beauty. We can form connections with other conscious beings and work together toward goals that transcend individual existence. These capacities and opportunities retain their significance and urgency, regardless of the metaphysical nature of reality. They provide a foundation for meaning and purpose that doesn't depend on solving the simulation question, even as they're enriched by the depth and wonder that such questions reveal. The simulation hypothesis ultimately returns us to the most basic questions of philosophy. What can we know? How should we live? What do we value? Why do these questions matter? Whether we find ourselves in base reality or nested simulations, these questions remain central to the conscious experience of existence itself. In questioning whether reality is real, we discover that the reality of our questioning, our wondering, our caring about truth and meaning, provides its own answer to the deepest concerns that simulation theory raises. Whatever else might be simulated, the consciousness that contemplates simulation proves itself real in the very act of contemplation.